Hey, 20 minutes.
Wow, it did.
All right, and we're going. We're recording.
Sweet. Good morning. Hi. So let's go to the show on the road. Let me just make sure my slides are working the way I want. Awesome. So hi, my name is Sarah, and I have been working with different organizations that develop software or buy software from other companies. So I've worked with a SaaS provider, hi, we're going to put all of your data in the cloud and we take complete responsibility for it. I have worked with a company selling on-premise software. So hi, we're going to sell you this thing that works perfectly well here, but guess what? You have to figure out how to implement it when we get it there, right? Which is its own special hell. I have really, really enjoyed it. And I've worked in organizations at different levels because security is like the best job ever, at least to me. I'm sure you guys can have your own opinions about your jobs. I've gotten a chance to play with people at different layers of every organization, right? So help desk, software developers, quality engineers, operations, project management, quality and process, senior management. I hugged the CTO last week. Okay, I've had the chance to kind of see this from perspectives of every person in the software or system development chain. And so I really enjoy talking about this because I really like good software and I really hate bad software. And I learned a lot of lessons the hard way working on this. During my time I've been working on this. And I've gotten my face smacked a couple times. And so I'd like to share the wisdom and the knowledge that I have come to with other people so that they can hopefully not make the same mistakes. Shortcut, some processes, and kind of just give a realistic perspective on, how to get things done, especially when you're starting from nothing. And so, we're going to cover these 3 points. Good software, right? So, you got to get a remote mic, dude. This is killing me. My definition of good software would be software that doesn't crash, right? Because crashy software is bad software. Software that just works. Software that doesn't allow me to pwn it and take out all your customers' records. So systems that stay up, systems that don't lose information, and systems that don't allow information corruption. So say you've got some mortgages in there, I'm going to get offended if your system's built in a certain way or built so that I can go in and alter the mortgage data. And security is really important. Most people tend to think about security in like the OAuth's top 10, the web application stuff. But honestly, bugs that take down production are significantly more important to me in an availability shop than a web application security bug. Oh, I love you. I love you so much. Oh my goodness. Does that work? Okay, because I just cannot handle standing.
Try it.
Okay, cool. So when you're dealing with people and you're talking about, okay, now turn this one off. Okay, good. When you're talking to people about software development, no, you didn't. Did you? Okay. So when you're talking to people about software development, you have to remember to sell it to them in their language. Okay, businesses do not care about web application security. They care about it about as much as their customers make them care about it, and that's it. But they do care about whatever their priorities are. So if they are an uptime environment, so they're like a SaaS provider, for any SaaS or PaaS or whatever cloud-based provider, they are all about their 5 nines. 5 nines are their business. And so if you sell to them based on uptime, 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 and you focus on bugs that affect stability or availability, they'll fund it. They'll fix it, okay? If it's a shop that, say, holds most of the mortgages for the United States, 50-50 with possibly another shop, they're going to care a lot about integrity. And they're going to be really, really nitpicky about stuff because they don't want those mortgages altered. And so it's confidentiality, encryption people, I don't know. I don't deal with those customers normally. But you focus on what the business cares about, and then you get some budget. And it's not all about the security standards. And so I started caring about all this. This started to be a real concept and honestly something that matters a great deal to me in my life when I heard about the Toyota sudden acceleration issues. And the long and short of it is that Toyota had bugs because they wrote software too quickly without taking proper quality measures, and they shipped it, and their cars started to suddenly accelerate, and they killed people. And it's no joke, this happened, and they covered it up. Okay, I have a real issue with this. It's criminal behavior, and they've largely gotten away with it, because 1.2 billion plus, recall costs is like seriously nothing. I find it just, that guy, he went to jail because he killed 3 people, when his car suddenly accelerated. Completely not his fault. He got an 8-year sentence. And they were going to let him rot. So luckily, it became completely impossible for them to hide that they were at fault for the sudden acceleration, and the sudden acceleration was real. And so he got out. But you can't give someone 4 years of their life back. I'm pretty sure the guy had a kid. That's his wife. And every organization in the world, when there's something that goes wrong, the first thing they're going to do in a litigious society, which we live in, is circle the wagons. So they're going to make sure that they control, admit no guilt, talk to no one, lawyer up, right? And they're going to try and control the situation as much as possible. Every organization out there, they're hopefully not going to be as bad as this. Toyota, like the automotive recalls, you need to have a certain number of deaths before they do anything, sort of thing. But everyone's going to kind of try and cover up. And so it's really important to push companies from the beginning to make good software, because when something happens, they're going to try and hide it. And so I go ahead and call security bugs or vulnerabilities or any other kind of bugs, bugs. Because developers do not understand what you mean when you say vulnerability. You are wasting your time. You are alienating your audience. You should go ahead and just start calling it a bug. Or a flaw. They know what a flaw is too. But a vulnerability, you're just screwed. And so they don't like bugs any more than we do. But there's kind of a cultural tolerance in the developer community for a certain percentage of bugs. Like, it's okay, well, we have a certain amount of bugs. It's okay that it's buggy, as long as it works, right? As long as it mostly works. And, there's different development methodologies. Agile's idea is we're going to ship a mostly working unit of code, right? And so they all know about it costs more to fix a bug if you find it later. I didn't know about that when I started doing this work, because I came at it from the other angle, from the security perspective. So they've seen this. And you can say, hey, if you catch the bug when you're just writing the code, we don't have to deal with it later, right? It would be awesome. They don't tend to know about what it costs when a platform goes down. And so those are numbers that operations people or security people are much more familiar with. Like, if I'm down for an hour, I may or may not have knocked over a production environment at one point in my career to the tune of millions of dollars. I would highly recommend that you avoid doing so in your careers. It wasn't funny. I mean, it's funny now. At the time, it was definitely not funny. So if you're tying things to uptime, which is availability, okay, you're tying things to the cost of downtime, which is lost revenue, lost customers, people running around screaming, you can go ahead and sell getting your bug fixes in, and you can tie them to the stability of the platform. You can also go ahead and tie in, the related downstream costs to bad software being developed and pushed. It's harder to get them to see that, the developers at the beginning of the food chain, the cost of things getting hacked at the end food chain, because there's so many steps in between where they start and you stop. So say your developers are writing some code. Well, it starts with product management. And I understand in open source projects it's a little bit different. I'm going to go ahead and focus on corporate America for a minute, or throughout this presentation, because that's what I know best. I know that there's parallels. A requirement is delivered. Woohoo! Customers deliver a requirement. Awesome little video, right? Requirement is communicated to developers. They do an architectural review. Hey, I can only draw my lines this way, right? Oh, wait, you need to do it this way. And they go ahead and they hash out what's going to get done, okay? They break it up and they prioritize it. Okay, well, we're going to go here to inflate the red balloon. And then they go ahead and they develop it. Developers don't work by themselves. So you'll have one developer over here. You may have a software development project that's like 40 people, 40 developers. We're not talking about testers. We're talking about developers. One product, okay? The company that I spend the most time with these days has 800 developers globally. Okay, we're talking about China, we're talking about Poland, we're talking about Russia, we're talking about the United States, India, Chennai, everywhere. And so they will go ahead and they will write a unit of code. Then somebody else will peer review it. So they'll go ahead and buddy up. Hey, would you check out my code? Right? And they'll go back and forth. And depending on the skill level of the people involved, because this is a human error issue, you know, they may or may not find things. And that human step is where they find architecture problems, where they find, I structured this badly, and by the way, that means I can hack your web app because I didn't architect authentication properly. Right? So that's the place where you find it. You don't find it with any other automation down the road. Well, getting there. So they do that. If you're lucky, they know about continuous integration, but they don't always, okay? If you walk into a shop and they've got a Jenkins, hallelujah, okay? But not always. You have to be very pragmatic about such things. And they run it through hopefully some kind of static code analysis tool. Then it goes to quality engineering. Quality engineering is typically taught, hey, okay, here's the features that product management has asked us to implement. We need to make sure it does that thing. So they know how to make sure it does that thing. But they don't know how, typically, like how to make sure it doesn't do things it's not supposed to do. Because they don't tend to be hackers. I mean, they all have a little bit of hacker, like, kind of hidden in there. And I find that waking it up and petting it and encouraging it gets them to do what I want a little bit more. But they aren't hackers. So they're not taught this. It's not in, like, QA school that you need to try and break it, okay? And they also don't know how to validate any of the security functions, like teaching someone how to validate the TLS v12, right? Come on, some of us slept this month, week, right? Okay, maybe not. Teaching them how to validate that something like encryption works is hard because they have never done it before in a lot of situations. It keeps on going. So these guys, by the time a developer, by the time a unit of code ships, it's gone through development, it's gone through QA, it's gone through operations, it's gotten deployed, and it's so far away from what they understand that it is really, really, really hard for them to even begin to comprehend those numbers. But I always throw them in just because I want to start getting them to think in that direction. And so bad software happens when people are trying to do things too quickly. Like the Toyota things. Toyota has this nastiness called Six Sigma. They've worked people to death. I really, 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 if you can't tell, don't like Toyota, okay? Because they're trying to reduce the takt time, so the waiting time between processes stepping up and ending, which is good. We don't like wasting time. But when you try and push people to go too quickly, and this is how it is in every software development shop there is, bad things happen. And businesses want things now, not yesterday. Customers want things yesterday. It also costs an awful lot to make good software, unfortunately. And that is a relative term, because it's all about money versus time. So I can go ahead and download and install find bugs. I think that covers my C and my Java. And that's awesome. I can use Clarke for my Objective-C. If you need these tools information, Wikipedia has a great thing on static code analysis tools, okay? So those are the free ones. And they're awesome, and they're great, and get started, do something. But the reporting sucks. Just speaking as someone who spent a couple months recently going through reporting for various different tools for our project, the reporting for find bugs is just painful for, you know, a security person to use. And so the cheap tools, they aren't so easy to use sometimes. Support isn't there. The expensive tools, also their bug checks aren't the same. So you're not going to get the same level of security bug checks with the find bugs as you would with the Veracode, okay? The cheap stuff doesn't cover as many things. So, okay, well, I can use, you know, that find bugs over here, and I can use Clarke over here. But how is it these guys started writing in JavaScript this week? Oh my God, they get very creative very quickly. It's hard to keep up with your software developers. And so you're kind of like, you're playing catch up and you're trying to do things money versus time. It costs. You have to teach people how to do it. They don't learn how to do it in school. That costs training. Training is expensive. And communication, I don't speak developer. I have learned how to fake it. I can get by, you know, I can communicate. But if you, in the little video I showed you before we got started, you had the product people essentially over here, and you had the tech over here, and they were not understanding each other. Well, that tends to parallel to the communication between security professionals and developers as well, because I'll start talking about vulnerabilities, they'll start talking about bugs. They don't understand any of the functionality or the features I'm asking them to do because they are not taught it in school. I don't understand what they do, right, because I am not a developer. And those communication issues can really slow down the adoption of an SDLC. So you have to get adoption and buy-in to do any kind of system development lifecycle work. And even if you don't know it, or if your company doesn't know it, they do follow a system development lifecycle. Okay, it can be implicit, like, yeah, so I did this, and my friend over there peered my code, and then this happened, and then this happened, and it got released, right? But they do have one. But the dictation, or the dictate for any kind of work like that comes from the guy with the money, because he who has the gold makes the rules. And if that person, if that part of the organization isn't on board, you're wasting your time and energy, and you need to focus, instead of doing all this other stuff or working on all these other people in the food chain, you need to go back and focus on the people who have the money. Because if they aren't approving this, you know, for this to be a priority, any time that these other people spend on doing security or better code in general conflicts with their priorities. Because you may think, well, I'm not getting the budget for the super awesome spendy security tool that I want this week. Yeah, but when you think about it, you know, you're looking at $45 to $50 an hour for a developer, right? When you count in like healthcare and benefits, or maybe it's not that high. Maybe you get cheaper developers. But, you know, for me to go ahead and ask operations to spend an hour, you have to go ahead and assume that that's an hour that's not being spent on a business priority. And so if the guy in charge doesn't want it, each and every one of these organizational units has different needs and priorities. So operations, they care about uptime and uptime and uptime. Oh, and it needs to deploy quickly and cleanly, pass change control, and not break their stuff, right? Downstream providers really appreciate it if we develop things that don't DOS them. Okay, I learned this. They really do like it that way. Product managers, they want to make sure their features go in, so they don't really care about the rest of us so much as, hey, business wants this, we're going to do this, is it on time, right? But you have to sell to them, because if you want a security feature, they are the one who decides when your feature goes in, all right? You're competing with their priorities, or the priorities they communicate, so you want them to be your buddy. Architects, hopefully your architects have clue. If they don't, they require love and caring and attention, okay? Because they are good at thinking about how to make things work. And if you can just kind of like inoculate them with, if you think about the security thing and how you make things work, it'll be better. You can get somewhere. Luckily, architects tend to be very intelligent people, and they tend to already have some interest in security, so it's not the worst experience in the world. Sales really are much happier if you kind of keep the technical stuff from them having to worry about it, because A, it's not what they do. B, they might communicate it to a customer in a way that the customer then misconstrues and makes your life harder. But what they care about is that your software meets the requirements their customers have for their customers to buy, period. They don't care. What they care is, can they sell it? And that's a good thing, and we're going to come back to that. Each of these groups have their own way of communicating. Software developers, quality engineers, everyone has their own thing they do. And so to get senior management to do what you want, because this entire journey of SDLC work for me has been, how do I get people to do what I want? Really, it comes down to that, right? Is you find out what they want, find out what the customers want, you find out who the customers who spend the most money want, and you tell them, you tell your senior management how to make them happy. Okay, that's what you do. And if your business doesn't have customers that require security, then you've got a different problem, because everyone's got security concerns. But you sell it to them in the way that they need to hear it, and then they buy, okay? For example, one of the organizations I worked with, they were about to go PCI level 1, And PCI Level 1, 6.6, yay, 6, requires you to have a software development lifecycle, a documented, secure software development lifecycle. Now, granted, it was like the 2.0 DSS, and it really focused on the OS top 10. But we were happy because they required dynamic security testing or web application firewall or, peer code review for secure bugs and code. It was a good thing. That was a customer-driven requirement. The company spent $1.5 million minimum on us having what we needed to do that job. And so that's the sort of thing you want to hook into. Credit card customers, HIPAA customers, FISMA customers, whatever make them happy. And yes, customers do require security. If you are downstream in a process, and they say you're working ops or you're in engineering, or you're lucky and you don't have to deal with sales, I'm so jealous. Customers are dropping these questionnaires on your salespeople's desk. So this is a snippet of an actual security questionnaire. And I know, right? Like, they don't understand, by the way, what they're asking us to do, but they surely do ask it of us. And so customers will give us these questionnaires in a SaaS or a PaaS environment. They're getting them all day, every day, okay? In an on-premise environment, they're getting them too. So customers have downstream requirements they need to meet, like the PCI DSS or the HIPAA stuff. When they get software from someone else or they use a SaaS provider, they try and verify compliance of the provider they're getting these stuff from with their compliance mandates. So I'm a really big fan of compliance. I know people are like, you compliance, and I'm like, suck it up. Because if we didn't have compliance, pushing customer-driven security requirements, we wouldn't have security. And that's just, I think security is a pretty big deal. And so I went ahead and, for the company before, they asked me to help implement their SDLC. I knew nothing. I was sweetness, adorability, and light. I was being super cute and super adorable, but I knew nothing. I didn't know what I was doing. And so the first thing that happened is they were an agile shop. There are two different primary, prevalent, thank you, development methodologies today. There's waterfall, which is, that very straight linear design with gates. So I can't move from the design stage to the construction stage without passing certain gates or requirements, okay? It's very linear, and it's not flexible, and it doesn't work, okay? When I see waterfall, I think avalanche, because basically things get all bottled up, and then they collapse down at the bottom. And so people have moved away from waterfall largely because it's such a rigid thing, and by the time, there's this thing called requirements churn. So you saw that little video where first they wanted 5 red lines, or 7 red lines, and then transparent lines, and there was ink. Light, the birds. And then there was a kitten and a balloon, right? That's an example of requirements churn. Customers change what they want all the time. And so waterfall doesn't work because once you go ahead and attach the requirements at the beginning, this is what we're doing, it doesn't change. It goes all the way through. But since the customers change their mind in the meantime, waterfall is just, it's a disaster. I don't like it. Agile is super pretty. I like Agile. But it has its own problems because it's not as structured. There's a lot of ways for sloppiness to sneak in there. And so with an Agile project, you'll go ahead and decide what you're going to do. You'll get the requirements. You're going to make sure that they all work. You're going to assign them to a sprint. So a sprint could be 3 days. A sprint could be a week. A sprint could be a month. And a sprint is a period of time during which you will create, test, and deploy a shippable unit of code. Okay, with a waterfall product, it can be 2 releases a year. It can be, seriously, 2 releases a year. That's slow, okay? It makes me cranky. Agile, like Rackspace and Etsy, deploy multiple times a day, which is really pretty. I love them. But some places, a month is fine. It's whatever your business needs in terms of agility. But so they'll go ahead and assign them to a sprint. They'll decide this is what we're going to put out. Developers will develop and peer review. Quality engineers will get in there and they'll start building out their test plans. Okay, as developers finish requirements, they go to quality engineering tests. When all of the stories are done, they use stories to define this work. It gets shipped, right? And it's much faster and you can do a lot more flexibility with it, and I like it a lot. But if you look at the above, there's no security in it. And that's one of the biggest problems, is people do not know how to embed security into a software development lifecycle. Microsoft is kind of the thought leader on this. Microsoft has their secure development lifecycle, and I kind of love them. You know, we can be open sourcey all we want, but they do it right. And so there's a lot of things in there that developers and QAs and architects don't know how to do that have to be embedded into their normal processes. And we're going to go ahead and go through some examples on how to do that, which might save you some time. So this is a fun story. It is a really, really, really bad idea to write somebody else's process for them. I was working at the organization that was going PCI Level 1, and I didn't know the difference between waterfall and agile. There is obviously a huge difference between waterfall and agile. And so I drafted them a process that was based on waterfall. And so it had like JIRA tickets with security being tracked in each ticket, and I thought it was awesome. Oh my God, I thought it was great. And so it had been approved, and we were going to do a training meeting where everyone was going to get trained, and there was going to be pizza. And so what had happened is, pizza's at 12:30. Between 12 and 12:30, the development managers and directors and vice president of engineering got together and realized that if they performed the process the way I wrote it, they'll be spending more time doing that than having any time to do development. And so I walked into the meeting thinking this was going to be a training meeting, and then we were going to eat pizza. But it wasn't. It was an ambush. Not an ambush. Not quite the right word. It was all the developers and QEs and testers, everyone was outside eating the pizza, and I was in the room with all the development managers and the VP being told why that didn't work. It was an incredibly humbling moment, and it wasn't exactly the best moment of my career. But it was really valuable, because I learned I don't know what they want. If you're bringing a requirement to a customer, bringing them the requirement, saying this is the requirement, and then helping them figure out how they would address that requirement while you help them understand the requirement is the way to go. Writing their processes just kind of gets you embarrassed in front of a lot of people, and then the pizza doesn't taste very good, right? Yeah, we'll move on from that. So there's a lot of different ways of looking at secure software development. Okay, there's a lot of different ways of representing it. There's a lot of different ways of understanding it. This is what I've boiled down to what I focus on, because it's really easy to get confused. It's such a confusing process. All right, I test REST. SOAP, oh my God, totally different than REST. JavaScript's over here being weird, And so I break it down to some basic stuff. And if you build up from the bottom, you get some good stuff. And so developers really don't know what we're asking them to do. They really, 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 really don't know what we're asking them to do. Because they're not taught in school. So they'll go to school, and they'll actually get taught to make insecure software. Like it's bad. And so they come out of school, and then they move into your shop, and you're stuck dealing with them and trying to figure out, well, how do we help them? Because if we don't help them, then they can't produce good code. And so a lot of different ways are available. You can pay someone to come in and teach a class. That's expensive. And if you're a small shop, though, it might work, right? If you're 40 people in one environment, it's not necessarily infeasible, or less, hopefully, because a 40-person class size is ridiculous. But it's not infeasible to have someone come in and teach an in-person class. It's okay, you can do it. But if you're 800 developers globally, that just doesn't work anymore. And it also brings in the issue of language. So I speak English, but some of my counterparts speak Russian. And when we start talking, it's a problem because they're super, super smart, but we can't communicate because the words they need to be communicated in, if I'm speaking English to them, are much more short, right? They need very simple language because it's not their first language. But if I was teaching them in Russian, I could teach them super abstract, super cool concepts, right? And when you're dealing with a global workforce, if you're not teaching them in their native language, you're losing a lot of context, especially when you put in things that are more cultural. Like, one of the security awareness things I do involves a really, really cute cat picture, okay? Some cultures get it, some cultures don't. I don't know. I have to pull out of a lot of humor. So in that situation, I don't like e-learning, but there's a greatness about it because you can buy it in the language of the people you're working with. And that's a good thing. And so you want to go ahead and have some basic education once a year because things change. You think, oh, well, they got taught once, right? Can't we just spend our money somewhere else? I'm cheap. It doesn't work that way because there are new CWEs out all the time. So if you're not continually educating them, and also they may decide they want to go and start writing in JavaScript. So if you don't continually educate them on the things that are relevant to them, just doing general coding education, like stuff that's common across all platforms, I haven't found it to work. I have found that what works better is to get them something specific to the languages they work on. And so e-learning works well if you have to do it. And that's never enough either, because it's kind of like going in and checking a box once a year. You know, I have to do my security awareness at work all the time anyway. You have to do like little ongoing things. So I just recently worked on a game that hunts bugs, and it's adorable because it has like the company I worked with, their slide, one of their products that we made up, wasn't really one of their products, and it was find the bugs on the slide. And it was cool because we demoed it at an internal conference, and we had people, you know, show up at the booth and point and try and find the bug. And it was great. It was interactive. They had a good time, and they found bugs. And we ended up having conversations about masking displayed social security numbers is a beautiful thing. And so that's one way of reaching people. You can do like in person, hard when you're a multinational global corporation, but you can do it. You can do those little games. I believe in SCORM, which is, you know, another type of e-learning, but Articulate. You can make whatever you want to make, and it's kind of cool. You can do internal best practice features. So once you start inoculating your little virus of secure/good software is good software, people will step up. If you bribe them by possibly recognizing them at an awards ceremony, then they will start stepping up and wanting to be seen as thought leaders within the organization. And so you can get them to do like a 5-minute flash on what they do to test a product or to design a product and put it up. They get recognition because everyone wants to be significant. And you get someone else to do your security awareness stuff for you, which is great because you can't do it all anyway. And also just taking little ad hoc moments to educate. This was one of our development managers, and there may have been a project, there may have theoretically, possibly, in some point in the past, a fixed problem, fixed product now, but a product that stored passwords in a database in an unsalted MD5. Could have happened, right? And then that development manager could have come to me with an MD5 hash and be like, so why is this such a big deal? And I'm like, I can crack it in 5 seconds. And he's like, oh, well, prove it. And I'm like, okay, mission accepted. Challenge accepted, thank you. And so there you go, there you go. I didn't crack it. The reason it took so long was not because it was a difficult problem. It was because I didn't have a site like that bookmarked. I Googled for sites that had MD5 hashes. And then I put the hash in, and I got the password. And he stopped being such a pain. He became awesome dev manager. Before, he was not necessarily awesome dev manager. But he started listening to me and doing the things I asked him to do. And it was great, because I was able to, through management, affect more change within his development group, and the product got better. And I was really happy about that. I actually reused this. This slide got reused in my security awareness class. I used to do security awareness for new hires. And since there's so many different stakeholders involved in software development, it's important to make sure your entire organization understands security. Plus PCI requires it. Thank you, PCI. And so I reuse this example to teach that. You want to go ahead and try and hook in as much as possible the organization into understanding security is important, because it'll make it easier for you to get what you want if what you want is some good code coming out of the house. And so I don't really know what I'm doing with this type of work yet, and I can admit it. But I can tell you what I do, and it helps. If you have to start somewhere, it's a really easy methodology. One of my customers was developing a mobile application, and it involved a downstream service provider. It involved S3. It involved AWS. And it involved a hook into their main product. And it was a mobile application that was supposed to run on a device and act somewhat like Siri. And it was designed to take information and pass it to and from speak recognition and an end stream provider, the customer who wanted that information. And it was pretty cool. It was super cool. Except, right, they asked me to do a security review on it. And I was like, this is awesome. I've never done a security review before, ever. So what I found works is I pulled the OWASP top 10 for cloud and for mobile, because it was a mobile product that ran in the cloud. And I sat down with the developer and the architect and the tester, because it was a very small development team, and I asked them to walk me through how their product worked. And so we filled up whiteboard after whiteboard after whiteboard, where they explained to me how the device ID came into play, when they explained to me how authentication to different services came into play, where encryption came into play, logging came into play, billing, because I kind of insist that we be able to bill for anything we're selling, right? Big deal to me, right? And we found a lot of problems with it, enough so that somebody kind of quit in between me starting and me finishing that review. I feel good for him. He got out at the right time. And so that product had really serious issues. You couldn't bill. There was no way to track state. The device code on the iOS device, you could stop it from sending billing information. So I could go ahead and do the speech lookup with it, all I wanted. There was no tracking unique identifier as well. It was based on the MAC ID of the iOS devices, which is a publicly known class. So it was like, what you couldn't prove, you couldn't track, you couldn't do anything. And there was no rate limiting on the utterances being sent to a downstream provider. So there was no, basically we could have DOSed them. We weren't allowed to do load tests on those people. We were not allowed to do load tests. We didn't know if it could perform. And if we had pushed, they could have sued us if someone had gone and pushed them down hard. It was bad. And so, I mean, this is not the whole list of stories, problems with that product. But the point is that you go in, even if you don't know about threat modeling and architecture, and you put on your evil hat and you go, if I wanted to mess up your day, how would I go about it? And you look at the industry standards, you can get pretty far, even without formal education. There are a lot of really good books on the subject. If it's something they've already written, that's its own special level of hell, again, because they've spent a lot of money making it. And the business is going to be, more hopeful that they don't have to go and spend money remaking the thing they've already made. So it's kind of tough because most of the time, security vulnerabilities aren't considered defects, okay, bugs by different organizations. You have to convince them that it is indeed a bug, that it is a problem, they need to prioritize fixing it. It just costs a lot more if it's already written to do. But the advantage is that you can make them show you. And it is so much better when they show you because you see all the things. So it's worth it. Come on here. So I feel kind of like a stalker when I read code reviews because it is kind of like a stalker thing to do, right? Hey, I'm going to go through all your code reviews and I'm going to find the people who do it really well and then I'm going to make a big fuss over them so that people know that this is why you do good code reviews because A, this is what it looks like, and B, because then you get made a fuss over, you get impressive. Like some people got a plaque for it recently. But it helps if you're doing security for a company to go through code reviews sometimes because you kind of get a feel for the maturity level of your developers. Because it's really hard if you're abstracted off. Like for developers, they're super far away from the deployment process. Security tends to be in a project management oversight role. So you're super far away from every part of the process. And code reviews, especially if they're using something that allows you to read their code reviews, there are many different products out there. give you a chance to kind of dig in. Static code analysis, I'm a huge fan of continuous integration. It's like super important to me because everyone's really busy and meat makes mistakes. So I'm a person, 5 out of 10 times I'm going to get it right. The other 4 times I'll get it mostly right. And then other time, I was really in a hurry and I forgot. Checklists help a lot. That's why they use them on airplanes so that we don't die. But if you can integrate it with automation, you're going to actually get some results. If you don't, you get it that 1/10 of a time. And if it's already gotten through peer code review and then there isn't that automation check, it's going to get into the build and it's going to deploy. So I like Jenkins. There's a lot of other options like it. Find bugs, Clockwork, Verity, Fortify, Veracode. I have opinions about all of these. And so it has to do what works for your organization. It has to cover all of your code. And it has to have at least some security checks. It doesn't have to be perfect from a security perspective because availability is the most important thing a lot of the time, or stability. And that is as much of a security issue as anything else. But you do want some security checks. And so this is actually why I started caring about all this, and then having to do PCI. Dynamic security testing, what does that mean, really? Come on. Anything? Bueller? Okay. So what that means is I get to hack your shit, all right? Which is super awesome. It's like the part of my job I love most, is when someone comes to me and they say, hey, could you test my web app? I'm like, yay, I could break up my burp instance and go and play with your stuff. So the problem is that developers aren't hackers, and I also don't want quality engineers to start being web application pen testers. So they need to know how to do it, but I don't want to train the next set of people coming in to take my job, okay? But even more importantly, I want them developing software, not trying to go out and hack everything. If I'm handing them Zap, which is, by the way, free, and if you're starting from nothing, it hooks into CI. So you can just build it into their process, okay? You drive it in with their Selenium tests, and then Selenium can be running all of their functional tests, and it can also be running it through Zap, and you can have it email off a report and make them include it in their pre-deployment stuff. Bing, right? Everyone's happy? You can even have them baseline the report, and then it gets a report when things change, okay? It's awesome. But when you're teaching people about Zap, it's really important to teach them not to scan things they shouldn't be seeing, and that is why I'm really careful when I teach quality engineers about it. Like, for example, the last time I did a class, they scanned Google. Like, we're sitting there and trying to teach them about not scanning things they shouldn't, and Google. Like, guys. So be aware, they will scan something when you teach that. Google, at least, is relatively safe. So you've got your web app testing, but APIs are a pain. Nobody really knows how to do that well. Nobody sells doing it well. You can't just go out and buy a product that does that, except gave it away at SOAP UI Pro. So, like, you can't run Zap against a REST API or SOAP API. You have to use something like SOAP UI Pro. It has security checks. The only reason I'm plugging them, or actually the reasons I'm plugging them is A, they're the only product out there that does it. And B, when there was something broken and I didn't like it, they fixed it. Okay, so that's how to get respect with me. But you have to use the right tool for the job. And since they are constantly getting creative, what you have to do is think, okay, well, I have a baseline set of tools, right? So a mandatory set, and then a set of complementary tools. So say most of your development's in C and Java, so maybe you might use, I don't know, find bugs, pick a thing, right? But then you've got your additional stuff like Objective-C, Clang, or whatever else. I unfortunately can't give the names of stuff I know because that's the stuff we buy. But you've got to go ahead and give them what they need, and don't forget your vuln scanner, because they don't know. Developers have absolutely no idea what to do with an embedded service. So if they just happen to be shipping a Jetty, they probably have not cleared out the default configuration stuff, usually have not, and they probably haven't configured it securely. And so I really like Nessus because it includes compliance modules. You can write your config files for your baselines and use it with Security Center. So you can set it up to audit your develop machines so that you know when there's drift before it builds, before it goes. And you can also just give them the ability to scan their own stuff and attach a report, or automate it, then attach the report. But if you're not doing system-based vulnerability checks to make sure that they're testing on most recent patched machines, they can have old system versions that they're developing on. I mean, this doesn't even deal with the outdated development framework issues, because that's also an issue it's hard to deal with. You can catch a lot of that, actually, if you spend more money on the static code analysis tools, like Veracode is really good about that. But you have to run those audits, because they will not know to do it. And if you set it up so that it just happens for them, they're happy. Make it easy, and teach them to be evil within reason. It's hard, because I like to teach them that hacking is sexy, but it's kind of like, can't be too sexy. And if you do hand them tools, because you have to, you want to get the tools straight to the developers. QA is too late. It costs way too much to fix something by the time it gets to QA. You want developers testing their own code for the bugs. You don't want them to be able to push the responsibility for it to somebody else, because that is one of the other reasons that stuff gets in that's just busted. It's because, well, it wasn't my fault, QA didn't catch it. Oh, really? Come on. So you have to give them the tools and the feedback loop way early in the life cycle, or they don't know, and there's the ability to pass a buck. Get clearance from your corporate IT if you give them security tools. Get clearance from your corporate IT if you give them security tools. Okay, because you can get people fired. I worked at a large company that held most of the mortgages, or half of most of the mortgages for the United States, and we had a really, really big policy that hacking tools were bad. If I had given them ZAP, I would have gotten people fired. So I always clear anything I'm giving someone that's of the hacking tool variety with the corporate security people, because this way I don't get anyone fired. Or I don't get fired for telling other people to do things that can get them fired. Or at least I don't feel bad. I like that one best. And so all of this stuff is great, but if you don't have enforcement processes, then it means nothing, because we're all going to do about as much as we can get away with. Let's be honest, right? I am a very busy person. I have a lot of responsibilities and a lot of people who rely on me, and all of the developers do too. They have bad days, they have good days, they may be broke this week. They have 15 different people who want something. They may not have slept, or they may just be lazy. Most of the time it's not that. Actually, most of the time developers really do mean well. I've never met one who really didn't care, but okay, maybe there's a couple. But there's a lot of other things pushing on people, so if you don't have a stop, like, okay, well, what's their completion measure? What's their money shot? Like, what makes them happy? Is it deploying? Well, then you make sure that before they deploy, they turn in a copy of their dynamic test results, so ZAP or whatever is appropriate for the project. They turn in a copy of their static analysis report, okay? And they show that they've done all their security checks for the project. And then they get what they want, deployment. I'm going to tell you straight up that even if they don't, they're still going to get to deploy. All right? Because that's how business works. They're still going to get to deploy. So what you want to do is, when someone hasn't done what they need to do, it's an iterative process. You're creating cultural change. It takes time. Make sure people know, hey, you didn't do your stuff. You're deploying anyway, but you're introducing risk into the environment or to our customers' environments. Don't do that, right? And then the next time, push harder. I actually go and deep dive into people's processes. Like once a quarter, I get to show up and be nosy. I play auditor. It's awesome. And it's good because then you can help the management team understand what's really going on, because they're as abstracted from it as you are. So the VP of engineering isn't going to know whether or not their developers did every single one of their code reviews. Okay? It just doesn't work. So that's why when you go in and you do that stuff, it helps out a lot. And once it pushes, now in an on-prem situation, you don't really have to worry about it. But in a SaaS provider world, you do. Once it pushes, you're going to want to make sure it works. So quality engineering usually, once it deploys a package into production in a corporate environment or development, depending on who, depending on how fast your lifecycle is, they'll go in and they'll do a series of functional tests. Okay, you want to make sure that you build your bad actor tests in with the functional tests they run. This is a maturity like 5 scale frequently for an organization. You won't get there fast. But when you do get there, it's beautiful. You want to make sure you're covering it with your vuln scanner. Because at the end of the day, that's what's going to tell you the most that you've got. You know, it's the most actionable intelligence you have. So you want to make sure that you've got coverage. If you've added it in a new environment, you don't have that IP space in your scanner, you want to add it to your scanner. And if you're lucky and it's a PCI environment, and you have to do an internal and an external application pen test, be happy, because you got some budget to do a pen test. And so that was a whole lot of information. What do you guys think?
Any questions?
Yeah. Hello.
Do you have any thoughts on prioritizing fixing security fixes, or let's say you're looking at something and there's things wrong with it, as far as easier selling?
Sure.
Repeat the question.
Oh, okay. So your lovely question was on prioritizing security fixes. So how do you go about prioritizing a security fix? And if it can lead to remote code execution and it's doable, it's like, hi, do that, right? I'll push a feature out of the way for that. SQL injection, and it's externally accessible, because there's a lot of stuff that'll be SQL injection, but it might be buried in the application somewhere. Well, if you don't have a login, but you have to pay to get a login, it can go in the next release, not like a bug fix release. Directory traversal gets me angry. I have no patience for that. If it's externally accessible, bug fix release. If it's not, next release. In terms of cross-site scripting, we're just talking about that right now, right? I really couldn't give a hoot. I really couldn't. But it depends on what you're moving around, too, right? So it depends on, most of the time cross-site scripting isn't an issue for the applications that I spend the most time in. It doesn't mean that your particular product or application, that won't be a higher thing. You might not want to prioritize it. The three I just mentioned were the things that I'll stop business for. In terms of other stuff, I'll stop for, if I can crash through it, if I can take your data for it, or if I can alter sensitive financial data. And if otherwise, the other thing I do is I play the so what game, because you really have to if you've been in this industry for a while, that or learn to drink heavily, or both. If I fix it, if I don't fix it this week, so what? Okay, cool, we'll throw it in the backlog, or maybe 3 releases out, It's not easy. If you want to talk more, or if you have any, yeah.
Stuff that you can demonstrate is high critical. It's demonstrating there's a vulnerability, execute.
Right. Well, also go back to the whole core customers and the criticality of the core customers. Because ultimately, I don't know if any of you read the Phoenix Project. If you haven't, it's by Gene Kim, and it's life-changing. It goes through all of these things that are wrong in IT. And I mean, I can't sell it highly. I give it to people who are burning out in security. What it comes down to is if the work doesn't tie to the company's priorities, you shouldn't be doing it. So you tie it, make sure it relates to that, otherwise, and then you don't have a problem getting people to do it either.
Do we have any other questions? We might want to do it outside, that way.
Yeah, sure.
Get the up and
All right, guys. Thank you so much for your patience. No, are you kidding? We're running about 20 minutes late. It's totally cool.
yeah, sorry about the video. I found out what the problem was.
Thanks.
I didn't have the laptop plugged in, and the power man.